Late afternoon settled heavily over a private estate in Lagos, turning the pool water into a sheet of glass that reflected everything people tried to ignore. Esther Odell, 7 months pregnant, stood near the edge with one hand resting lightly on her belly, the other steadying herself against a tension she couldn't yet name. Laughter spread across the patio. Business elites, polished guests, people who praised her husband's wealth while refusing to meet her eyes. Caleb Odell approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His steps were slow, deliberate, too controlled for a man greeting his wife. "Caleb," she murmured, sensing the shift. "Why are you looking at me like that?" He didn't blink. "Tell me the truth, Esther. Right now." Her breath hitched, confusion tightening her chest. "What truth? What are you talking about?" But instead of answering, he kept moving forward until the sun cast both of their shadows into the water, one steady, one trembling. And in that suspended moment, Esther understood. Something had already been decided without her voice, her safety, or her child. What came next would expose everything behind the perfect mansion walls. If this beginning pulls you in, like the video and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales for more gripping stories of truth and resilience. From the moment Caleb stepped closer, the air around the pool shifted. Conversations thinned, laughter softened, and an unease passed quietly among the guests like a breeze no one wanted to acknowledge. Esther steadied herself, fingertips grazing her belly as if Nia, though unnamed, unborn, could anchor her to the ground beneath her feet. Caleb's eyes, once indifferent, now carried something sharper, something that made Esther's breath slow. And though she didn't know the source of it, she knew she could no longer ignore the way he had changed. When the opening tension finally snapped and her heel met the pool's edge, the nightmare began. Fell. The splash fractured the afternoon, and the world around her turned into a blur of muffled screams and cold water swallowing everything. The shock punched through her system as she kicked upward, fighting for breath while one hand clutched instinctively at her stomach. The last thing she remembered was someone shouting her name before darkness pulled her under. She woke to fluorescent lights humming overhead and the faint pressure of a blood pressure cuff around her arm. Her first thought was the baby. Her second was the sound of her own heartbeat pounding beneath the oxygen monitor. A nurse leaned in quickly. "You're safe, Mrs. Odell. Just breathe." But safety was relative. Her palms trembled as she whispered, "Is my baby?" "We're monitoring closely," the nurse replied. "She's fighting." For the first time since the fall, Esther let herself breathe deeply enough for tears to rise. The door opened and Mama Ruth walked in, not with the hurried panic of a woman afraid, but with the solemn, controlled fury of someone who already knew the truth. "Who did this to you?" she asked softly. Esther closed her eyes. She didn't want to say his name, but silence would protect the wrong person. "Caleb," she said. "He pushed me." The tremor in her voice was thin, but the power of the confession was unmistakable. Mama Ruth sat beside her, took her hand and whispered, "He will not bury this." Caleb, sitting in the hallway outside, wasn't prepared for how quickly his world would constrict. The calm, dismissive arrogance he normally carried had evaporated hours earlier, replaced by the slow, suffocating realization of what he had done, not just in a moment of rage, but through months of neglect, suspicion, and cowardice. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Board members, lawyers, close associates, all wanting answers he didn't have. When Mama Ruth stepped into the hallway, he stood. "Mother." "Not a word," she said, holding up her hand. "You will speak when the police ask for your statement. Not before. You're believing rumors." She slipped. "She didn't slip," Mama Ruth snapped. "And we both know your anger long ago stopped being harmless." Caleb opened his mouth to argue, but the look in her eyes silenced him. For the first time since his rise to power, someone saw straight through him, not as a tycoon or a public figure, but as a man who had failed. And Mama Ruth was not done. "The doctors say the baby survived because of their intervention, not because of you. Keep that in mind when you prepare your excuses." Caleb froze. "Mother, Enough," she said. "You will answer for this." The next morning, the police arrived quietly. Inspector Hayes didn't bother with small talk. He carried himself like a man who had seen enough wealthy men crumble. "Mr. Odell," he said, "we'd like you to accompany us for questioning." Caleb stared at him, stunned. "I'm not being arrested." "Not yet," Hayes replied. "But you will answer questions today. Without counsel." "No. You may call counsel," Hayes said. "But you're coming with us." Caleb swallowed hard, glancing toward the door that led to Esther's room. For the first time he felt the walls closing in. Inside the hospital, Esther gained strength slowly. The machines calmed. Nia's heartbeat steadied. And the stillness gave Esther room to think, not about the accident, but about what had come before it. The months of emotional absence, the hollow apologies, the quiet suspicion she couldn't name until it was too late. When Dr. Reynolds entered with a clipboard, she braced herself. "We reviewed your results," he said. "Your daughter stabilized overnight. She needs continued monitoring, but she's resilient." Relief washed over her like warmth after a storm. Then his face shifted. "But regarding the incident, Mrs. Odell, the injuries don't match an accidental fall." Her throat tightened. "I know. Did someone push you?" Her silence was answer enough. "Do you intend to file a statement?" he asked. She looked down at her hands. Hands that once cooked for a man who now treated her like a burden. Hands that had held a future he had tried to erase. "Yes," she whispered. "I do." 2 days later, she gave her official statement. She didn't dramatize anything. She didn't exaggerate. She simply told the truth. What he said, how he stepped closer, how the crowd avoided eye contact, and the way the world fell out from under her feet. Inspector Hayes listened with unwavering focus. When she finished, he set down his pen. "Mrs. Odell," he said, "we will pursue charges." A quiet strength rose inside her, something she had forgotten she possessed. "Good," she said. Meanwhile, Caleb's world eroded. His business partner, Daniel Greer, delivered the news bluntly during a private meeting. "The board is calling an emergency vote," Daniel said. "Your reputation is toxic right now. Major investors are walking away." Caleb slammed his fist on the table. "You're abandoning me over allegations." "They're not allegations," Daniel said coldly. "There's footage." The room went still. "What footage?" "A guest recorded your argument. It's already in the hands of investigators." Caleb's throat tightened. "You don't come back from this," Daniel said. "Not as CEO." Caleb looked at him, struggling to form words, but Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. Not comforting but final. "You did this, Caleb. And now you live with it." Esther remained in the hospital for a week, slowly regaining strength. When she finally held the ultrasound photo of Nia, she cried. Not because she was fragile, but because she had survived. Mama Ruth visited often, bringing soup, blankets, and the unwavering support of a woman determined to right a wrong. One afternoon, she sat at Esther's bedside and said, "You will not return to that house." "I don't know where I'll go," Esther whispered. "You will come with me," Mama Ruth said. "And when the time is right, you will stand tall again." Tears filled Esther's eyes. "Why are you helping me like this?" "Because," Mama Ruth said, "you are the only innocent one in this story." The investigation moved quickly. Footage of the push. Witnesses confirming the argument. Medical reports detailing blunt force impact. Text messages from Caleb's mistress, Alexis Vale, revealed a pattern of manipulation. Messages filled with calculated bitterness disguised as concern. When confronted, Alexis cracked. "I didn't tell him to push her," she cried during questioning. I only said he shouldn't trust her." "That was enough," Inspector Hayes replied. She wasn't arrested for violence, but she wasn't spared either. Her employer fired her. Her reputation collapsed. Her private messages leaked online, and the world saw her for what she was, a woman who played with someone else's family until everything shattered. Consequences found her, slow, humiliating, and public. But the final reckoning belonged to Caleb. The trial drew attention from across the city. Everyone wanted to see how a man like him would defend the indefensible. He arrived with a legal team but no confidence. Esther arrived with Mama Ruth, a quiet strength in her posture. When called to testify, she spoke softly, but every word hit the room like a stone. "He looked at me," she said, recalling the poolside moment. "And I realized he no longer saw me as his wife or the mother of his child, but as someone who needed to be silenced." Caleb lowered his gaze. The judge watched him closely. "Do you deny pushing her?" Caleb hesitated. The courtroom waited. "No," he said at last. "I don't deny it." Gasps rippled across the room. His attorney whispered urgently, "Caleb, sit down." But it was too late. The truth was out, and the law took hold. He was sentenced to 3 years in state custody, along with mandatory counseling and a restraining order preventing him from contacting Esther or approaching her home. When bailiffs escorted him out, he glanced once at Esther, as if hoping for forgiveness. But she didn't meet his eyes. Forgiveness was not hers to give. Freedom was, and she had already chosen it. Outside the courthouse, a gentle breeze passed through the crowd. Reporters swarmed with questions Esther didn't answer. She walked past them with her head held higher than it had been in years. Mama Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder. "Justice is never perfect," she said softly. "But today it was enough." Esther nodded. For the first time it was truly enough. What she didn't know was that the days ahead would bring something even more powerful, something that would not only change her story, but confront the last person who believed he had escaped consequences. And that moment was already on its way. Weeks after the verdict, Esther returned to the small home where she and baby Nia had begun their new rhythm. The world outside still murmured about the trial, but inside that quiet living room, life moved at a gentler pace. Each dawn felt like a doorway she had earned. She no longer carried the weight of just surviving. She was learning how to live again. One evening, while rocking Nia to sleep, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back wasn't the frightened wife from the mansion or the patient lying beneath hospital lights. She looked steady, someone who had walked through fire without letting it define her. The journey had carved something sharp and honest inside her, something she never expected to find, certainty in her own voice. She thought about the women who had written to her, the ones who said her courage had opened a path they never believed existed. For the first time, Esther understood that her story hadn't ended in the courtroom. It had simply shifted into a place where her truth could breathe. As night settled, she stepped onto the porch, holding Nia close. The city glowed in the distance, but the moment belonged only to them. A soft breeze brushed her face, carrying the quiet promise that healing was not a finish line. It was a choice made every day. She whispered, "We're safe now," and Nia's tiny fingers curled around hers as if agreeing. If this journey touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales so more stories of resilience can find their way home.